The first time my phone rang that night, I thought it was a wrong number. By the fifth call, I knew it was no accident. By the 23rd, I set the phone on the table, watching the screen light up again and again with the same name. By the time the clock struck midnight, the count had reached 47. My son, Scott Brown, was begging me to answer. All of this because 3 days after my birthday, he had sent me a text that read, "Happy birthday, Mom. You should have reminded me." I did not reply. Instead, I called my lawyer that afternoon and shut down every monthly transfer from the family trust. Mortgage support, car payments, tuition checks, shopping accounts gone, with one signature. For the first time in years, the flow of money from my account into Scott and Nicole's household stopped. By nightfall, my phone was a machine gun of desperate calls. I sat alone in my living room, the glow of the lamp casting warm light over the pearl necklace I had chosen that morning. I poured myself a glass of red wine, swirled it slowly, and listened to the buzzing phone. I had never heard my son sound so frantic, not even when he was a boy with a broken arm at summer camp, not even when he went through his divorce. That night, he left voicemails layered with panic. "Mom, please, pick up. Something's wrong with the bank." "Mom, the mortgage payment bounced. Nicole's cards aren't working." "Mom, whatever this is, it isn't funny anymore. We need that money." Notice the words. Not "we need you." Not "we love you." Not "are you okay?" Always "we need that money." I took a sip of wine and leaned back into the armchair Samuel had once claimed as his favorite. My late husband had been gone 7 years, but I could almost feel him there, steady as stone, reminding me that dignity had a price. Samuel had left us comfortable, very comfortable, but what he gave me most was the courage to stop being everyone else's doormat. I had spent more than 7 decades learning to say yes, yes to extra shifts when I was a young teacher, yes to every holiday request, yes to checks slipped across the table whenever Scott or Nicole looked worried. But that night, with my phone flashing again and again, I finally understood the power of no. The wine glass trembled slightly in my hand, not from fear but from something colder, sharper, more exhilarating. Independence. For the first time since Samuel's funeral, I felt in control. By the 35th call, I muted the phone and let the silence fill the apartment. Outside, traffic whispered along the darkened street. Inside, I could hear only my own breathing and the steady tick of the clock on the mantel. My pulse slowed, my shoulders loosened. The weight of years began to lift. When the final call came, number 47, I let it roll to voicemail. His voice cracked, raw with exhaustion. "Mom, I know you're upset about the birthday. I'm sorry, okay? Please, we can't survive without your support." Survive. Such a dramatic word for people living in a house twice the size of mine, driving cars worth more than most families' yearly income, sending their children to schools with tuition higher than the salary of a new teacher. Survive? No, what they meant was continue living the life I had funded for them. I pressed the power button and turned off the phone. The screen went dark, and for the first time in years, I slept through the night without interruption. Morning sunlight poured through the curtains, bright and unforgiving. I stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee, remembering the text that had started it all. 3 days late. 4 pitiful words. "You should have reminded me." That was the moment something inside me shifted. For decades, I had believed that being generous was the same as being loved. I had convinced myself that sacrifice was proof of loyalty, that writing checks was the language of family. But generosity without gratitude is not love. It is servitude. As I stirred cream into my coffee, I thought of every time I had bailed Scott out, the down payment on his house, the 6-figure honeymoon to Europe, the private schools for Emma and Lucas, my grandchildren who barely looked up from their screens when I visited, the designer handbags for Nicole, purchased on the credit cards I paid. Nearly $1.5 million in 7 years. And still, no one remembered to call me on the day I entered this world. I carried my mug to the window and looked out over the skyline. Somewhere across town, Scott and Nicole were scrambling, calculating, maybe even cursing my name. Let them. For once, the ledger was in my favor. I smiled. The story was only beginning. And, dear listener, so was I. People call it generosity. They call it sacrifice. Some even call it love. But after 7 years of playing banker to my grown son, I can tell you the real word: servitude. When Samuel died, I was 65, a retired English teacher who thought her best years would be spent as a grandmother, reading stories by the fire, baking cookies, being cherished as the family matriarch. Samuel had been a lawyer, steady and practical. He left behind an estate worth more than $85 million, spread across trusts and investments that he carefully arranged so I would never want for security. At first, I followed his example, keeping the distributions fair. Scott received a monthly allowance to help with his career transition. Nicole received a household stipend while she adjusted to staying home with the children. It felt right. It felt like family. But generosity has a way of mutating when no one says thank you. The monthly transfers grew larger. Then came the emergencies, tuition shortfalls, mortgage adjustments, medical bills that somehow never appeared in insurance records. I wrote check after check, each one smoothed with a mother's smile. When Scott's first marriage collapsed, I covered the attorney fees. When he proposed to Nicole, I funded the lavish wedding, the kind of event that still circulates in their friends' photo albums. Their honeymoon, a six-figure extravagance across Europe, was stamped on my credit card. By the time Emma turned 10 and Lucas 12, I had already contributed more than $1.5 million to their household. And still, when I visited for Sunday dinners, the talk revolved around renovations, vacations, and private schools, always with the unspoken assumption that I would foot the bill. Nicole barely looked up from her phone at those gatherings. She sat at the head of the table she decorated with flowers ordered on my dime, her manicured fingers scrolling while I tried to make conversation with grandchildren who were being raised to see me as a walking wallet. Scott would carve the roast, offer me a slice, then pivot to discuss interest rates, property taxes, or which neighbor had purchased a new car. It was like watching actors in a play where I had been miscast. I thought I was supposed to be the leading lady, the mother whose presence mattered. Instead, I was reduced to a minor character who financed the production. The warning signs were everywhere, but I ignored them. I told myself that Emma's silence was just teenage shyness, that Lucas's distracted replies were the nature of boys his age. I told myself that Nicole's cold eyes were exhaustion, not disdain, and Scott, my only child, surely he was just overwhelmed by responsibility, not indifferent to the woman who had carried him into the world. The truth is simpler. They had grown used to me giving without question, and I had grown used to excusing it. There was a moment I should have recognized the pattern. It was Thanksgiving, 2 years ago. I had spent 3 days preparing pies, casseroles, and stuffing in my apartment kitchen, hands aching from arthritis. I carried the dishes to their house, smiling as the grandchildren rushed by me without a glance. Nicole kissed my cheek, perfumed and perfect, and whispered, "You shouldn't have gone to all this trouble. Next year, just write a check for catering." I laughed politely. Inside, something cracked. Another moment came last Christmas. I gave Emma a necklace and Lucas a new guitar. They muttered thanks, then hurried off to their rooms. Later that evening, Scott pulled me aside and said, "Mom, we're a little tight this month. Could you help with the property tax bill? It's just a few thousand." A few thousand. After nearly $1.5 million. I nodded and reached for my checkbook. I had forgotten what it felt like to say no. That was the life I lived before the birthday incident. Week after week, month after month, I poured my savings into their world. Each transfer carried the weight of hope that maybe this time they would notice, this time they would be grateful, this time they would treat me like more than a ledger entry. But gratitude never came. Respect never came. All that came were more requests, more demands, more entitlement. By the time my 72nd birthday arrived, I had been worn down to the thinnest version of myself. I was no longer Theresa Brown, the woman who had once corrected essays and quoted Shakespeare to sleepy classrooms. I was simply Mom, the trust fund, the banker of last resort. And then came the chocolate cake, and the silence, and the text that said, "You should have reminded me." That was the day the doormat died. I had baked the same cake every year since Scott was 5 years old. Chocolate, rich with butter and sugar, frosted by hand because that was how he liked it. My arthritic fingers struggled with the mixing bowl, but I refused to let them stop me. The smell filled my apartment with memories, birthday parties in the backyard, children laughing, Samuel lifting Scott onto his shoulders to blow out the candles. That morning I sent a short text, "Cake's ready whenever you want to stop by." I placed the cake on the counter, polished the silver serving knife, and waited. Hours slipped past like shadows. Morning became afternoon, afternoon stretched into evening. Each time a car slowed on the street below, I peered through the curtain, searching for the gleam of Scott's black SUV. Each buzz of my phone made my heart leap, but it was never him. By nightfall, the frosting had begun to harden. By the second day, it looked tired and dry. By the third, it sat like a silent accusation, daring me to admit the truth. On the fourth day, I slid it into the trash, scraping away the last sweetness of a tradition that no longer mattered. That was when the message arrived. "Hey Mom, happy birthday. Sorry it's a few days late. You should have reminded me." I read it once, then again, then 10 more times. The words burned deeper with every glance. Should have reminded him. As if my existence, the day I carried him into this world, was a trivial detail I should have penciled onto his calendar. I thought of the nights I had walked the floor with him, feverish and crying. I thought of the years I worked 2 jobs to pay for his college education. I thought of the checks written weddings, honeymoons, mortgages, private schools. And now, after more than 7 decades of life and sacrifice, I was supposed to remind him to care? My hand trembled as I set the phone down. The old Theresa might have replied with forgiveness. "Don't worry, sweetheart. These things happen." The old Theresa might have invited him to dinner, tried to soften the blow, tried to remind him of love he clearly no longer felt. But the old Theresa had died somewhere between the stale cake and that careless text. Instead, I reached for my address book and dialed Brandon Taylor. Brandon had been our family attorney for nearly 2 decades. He answered on the second ring. "Mrs. Brown," he said, his voice calm as always. "What can I do for you today?" "I need to make changes to the family trust," I replied. My voice surprised me, steady, firm, almost cold. "How quickly can we stop the distributions?" There was a pause. Brandon knew exactly what I was asking. He had overseen the automatic transfers since Samuel's death. "May I ask what prompted this?" "What prompted it?" I nearly laughed. 7 years of being treated like a bank account. More than $1.5 million given without gratitude. A birthday forgotten, then reduced to a text blaming me for his neglect. That is what prompted it. Brandon cleared his throat. "Understood. I can restructure the distributions immediately. By Tuesday, everything will be suspended." "Do it," I said. The line went quiet as he worked. I stood at the window, watching the traffic below, feeling something new press against my chest. Not grief, not sorrow, but a hard, clean strength. By Tuesday afternoon, every automatic payment was gone. No more mortgage assistance, no more car payments, no more tuition checks. Nicole's credit cards, once cushioned by my transfers, would suddenly decline. I did not warn them. Why should I? They had never asked where the money came from, never questioned whether I could afford their endless demands. Gratitude had been absent for years. That evening, I poured a cup of tea and opened a book I had not touched in months. For the first time in a long while, I read without guilt. Let them notice the silence when the bills came due. Let them wonder why the bank account had run dry. The cake was gone. The text was burned into memory. But I had discovered something far more nourishing than chocolate, the taste of saying no. The pounding began just after dawn. At first, I thought it was construction in the building. But when the pounding grew louder, urgent, accompanied by the shrill ring of my doorbell, I knew. Scott and Nicole had found their way to my front door. I did not hurry. I took my time slipping into a soft gray sweater, fastening the pearl necklace Samuel had given me on our 40th anniversary. If they wanted to demand answers, they would receive them from a woman who looked composed, not cornered. Through the peephole, I saw Scott pacing, his hair disheveled, his face pale with sleeplessness. Nicole stood beside him, rigid, clutching her oversized purse like a weapon. Her eyes darted toward the hallway camera, as if she were calculating how she appeared. I opened the door with a calm smile. "Good morning, dears. What brings you here so early?" Scott pushed past me into the apartment. Nicole followed, her heels clicking like angry punctuation. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Scott demanded. "The bank says all transfers from your accounts have stopped." Our mortgage bounced, the car payment bounced, Nicole's credit cards were declined. I closed the door gently, then turned to face them. They looked less like adults and more like frightened children who had just discovered the candy jar was empty. "Would you like some coffee?" I asked, walking toward the kitchen. "We don't want coffee," Nicole snapped. "We want to know why you cut us off without warning." I measured the coffee ground slowly, poured water into the machine, and let the silence stretch. Finally, I said, "I've been doing some thinking lately. About family dynamics, financial responsibility, and basic courtesy. Things like remembering important dates." Scott shifted uncomfortably. "Mom, if this is about your birthday—" "Oh, it's about much more than that," I interrupted, turning to face them. "Your birthday neglect was simply the final straw. Do you know how long it has been since either of you asked how I'm doing, how I'm feeling, whether I need anything?" They stared at me blankly. "I'll tell you. 14 months. 14 months since either of you treated me like a person instead of a trust fund." Nicole's face flushed red. "That's not fair. We invite you to family dinners. You invite me to dinners where you ignore me while discussing renovations I am paying for, vacations I am funding, and schools I am subsidizing. I am not a guest at those dinners. I am the entertainment the old lady tolerated because she writes the checks." Scott sank onto the couch, rubbing his forehead. "Mom, I know we haven't been perfect, but cutting us off completely is extreme." "Extreme?" I raised an eyebrow. "In the past 7 years, I have given your family more than $1.5 million in direct payments. That doesn't include gifts, holidays, or the down payment on your house. In return, I have been treated like an obligation, not a mother." Nicole crossed her arms. "You can't just abandon your family because your feelings got hurt." "I am not abandoning anyone," I said, my voice steady. "I am simply requiring the same courtesy I have always shown you. Acknowledgement, appreciation, basic respect. If that is too much to ask, then perhaps we need to reconsider what family means." Scott looked up, desperation softening his tone. "Mom, we can do better. We can call more, visit more. Just please, we need that money. The house, the kids' schools, everything depends on it." I set 2 mugs of coffee on the table, though neither of them reached for one. "Everything you have built depends on my generosity," I corrected. "And generosity requires gratitude, not entitlement." Their silence filled the room thick and bitter. Finally, I leaned forward. "Here is my offer. You have 30 days to show me that I am more than your funding source. Not through frantic calls or panicked visits, but through genuine interest in my life. If after 30 days I feel valued as a person, we can discuss a modest level of support. If not, the arrangement is over permanently." Nicole's composure cracked. "What are we supposed to do in the meantime? We have payments due, tuition deadlines." "The same thing millions of families do," I said pleasantly. "Live within your means. Scott has a salary. You could downsize, get jobs, sell a car. You might even learn responsibility." Her mouth opened in outrage, but no words came. Scott stared at the floor, shoulders slumped. 30 days, I repeated, standing. "And understand this, I have spent a lifetime detecting the difference between genuine emotion and performance. Do not insult my intelligence by pretending." They left without another word, Nicole trembling with fury, Scott looking stunned and lost. When the door clicked shut, I finally sipped my coffee. It tasted better than any I had brewed in years. The performance began the very next morning. My phone lit up at 9 o'clock sharp, Scott's name flashing across the screen. "Hi, Mom," his voice sang with syrupy sweetness. "Just calling to see how you're feeling today. We never ask enough about your health. For 7 years, my son had never once called me just to ask about my health, not unless it was a polite prelude to requesting money." I nearly laughed out loud. But I played along. "I'm fine, Scott. How thoughtful of you." He pressed on. "Maybe we could have lunch this week. Just the 2 of us. Like old times." Old times. I racked my memory. There had never been a single instance of Scott inviting me to lunch without Nicole by his side, or the children acting as buffers. But I answered, "That sounds lovely." 47 minutes later, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Emma. 14 years old, my granddaughter had never initiated a conversation with me. Our exchanges at family dinners had been limited to short, polite responses. "Hi, Grandma," she said brightly, her tone rehearsed. "I just wanted to call and tell you about my day at school." She rattled off names of friends, details about teachers. A litany of cheer I could hear was scripted. My heart ached. This wasn't love, it was manipulation. Still, I listened kindly. When she paused, I said gently, "Emma, sweetheart, you don't have to do this." "Do what, Grandma?" "Pretend to be interested because your parents told you to call." There was silence. Then her voice, smaller, more honest. Dad said you were mad at us, that maybe you wouldn't be our grandma anymore if we didn't try harder. Those words pierced me deeper than any forgotten birthday. They had weaponized their own daughter's fear to keep the money flowing. I steadied my voice. Emma, listen to me. I will always be your grandmother. No matter what happens with your parents, that will never change. She sniffled softly. Okay, can I go? I have homework. Of course, sweetheart. I love you. I love you too, Grandma. The next act of their play arrived on day 5, a massive bouquet of white roses and lilies delivered to my door. The card read, "Thinking of you always. Love, Scott and Nicole." Never in all these years had they sent flowers. Not for Mother's Day, not for my birthday, not even when Samuel died. But now, when money was at stake, suddenly they had $200 for a display. Within an hour, Nicole called. Her voice dripped with artificial brightness. "Hi, Mom, did you get our little surprise?" "They're lovely," I said evenly. "I just wanted you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done. I know I haven't always been the best daughter-in-law, but I want to change that. Maybe we could go shopping this weekend, get our nails done, a girls' day." A girls' day. From the same woman who once told Scott I was too needy when I phoned during a hurricane. I smiled into the receiver. "I'll think about it." By day 8, the charade grew even bolder. A handwritten letter arrived from Lucas. The handwriting was unusually neat, clearly corrected by an adult. "Dear Grandma, I think you are the best grandma in the world. I love you so much. I hope we can do fun things together soon." Sweet. Transparent. 12-year-old boys do not write such letters without coaching. That evening I called Scott. "The letter from Lucas was touching," I began. "Oh, that was all his idea," Scott said quickly. "He's been feeling bad about not being closer to you." "Scott," I cut him off, my tone sharp. "Stop lying. You coached him, just like you coached Emma." Silence filled the line. Finally, he muttered, "Mom, we're trying to show you we care. You're trying to show me you can follow a script when money is on the line. That's not the same." I hung up, exhausted. The 30-day trial had barely begun, and already I could see the truth. There would be no genuine change, no real affection. Only performances, only manipulation, only desperate acts to preserve the lifestyle they believed was theirs by right. I set the flowers in a vase on the dining table. Their fragrance was strong, almost suffocating. Every white petal looked less like affection and more like evidence of just how far they were willing to fake love in exchange for cash. It was a quiet afternoon when Pamela Miller, my oldest friend, invited me for lunch at our favorite cafe. We had been meeting there for decades, two widows sharing gossip and comfort over soup and sandwiches. That day, though, the comfort did not last. Pamela leaned across the table, her expression troubled. "Theresa, I need to tell you something. Nicole was at the club yesterday. She was talking about you." I set down my teacup, the porcelain rattling against the saucer. "Talking about me?" Pamela nodded. "She told everyone you've been acting erratic since Samuel died. Impulsive spending, unstable moods. She suggested you might need to be evaluated for competency." The words landed like a physical blow. For a moment, the cafe's cheerful chatter faded into silence. I forced myself to breathe. "Are you sure?" "Positive. I've known you for 30 years, and you're sharper than anyone I know." But Nicole was convincing. Several women nodded along, as if they believed her. I stared at the tablecloth, white roses printed on pale fabric. Roses, just like the bouquet sitting in my apartment, a gift bought with my own money and presented as love. Suddenly, every bloom looked like a lie. After lunch, I went straight home and dialed Brandon Taylor. He answered on the first ring. "Brandon, I need an honest answer. Has anyone contacted you about my mental state?" There was a long pause. Then his voice softened. "Yes. Scott called last week. He said he was worried about unusual financial decisions you'd been making. He asked about the process for having someone declared incompetent." My hands trembled. "And what did you tell him?" "I told him you're entirely competent and that such an evaluation would be a waste of everyone's time." "But Theresa," the fact that he asked. "I know exactly what it means," I said, cutting him off. After we ended the call, I sat in Samuel's old armchair, staring at those flowers on my dining table. I replayed every detail of the past 2 weeks, the sudden calls, the syrupy voices, the letter from Lucas, Emma's forced confession. None of it had been love. It had been evidence. They weren't trying to win me back. They were building a case. It all made sense now. To declare me unfit, they needed witnesses, a pattern of behavior, a trail of proof. The fake concern, the sudden attention, the thoughtful gestures, all designed to show the world that Scott and Nicole were the devoted children of a confused, unstable old woman. They had been planning this for years, I realized. From the moment Samuel's coffin lowered into the ground, they had seen opportunity. My grief, my generosity, my habit of saying yes, they had woven it into a story. The generous but reckless widow, the aging mother who needed protection from herself, the perfect excuse to seize $85 million. Anger surged through me, cold and clean. They thought they were clever. They thought they could outplay me. They forgot who taught Scott to read, who stayed up nights editing his college essays, who kept the household running while Samuel built his practice. They forgot I had spent a lifetime spotting lies in student papers and excuses in faculty meetings. They underestimated me. I rose from the chair and straightened my shoulders. If they wanted a game, they would have one, but the rules would be mine. The next morning, I called Brandon again. Schedule an appointment with the most respected neuropsychologist you know. I want a full evaluation, tests, documentation, the works. When this is finished, I want proof, in writing, that I am of sound mind. Theresa, you don't need to. Yes, I do, I interrupted. If they're building a case, I will build mine stronger. After hanging up, I made another call. This one to a private investigator named Jean Davies, recommended to me years ago during Samuel's business disputes. Her voice was brisk and professional. Mrs. Brown, what do you need? Everything, I said. Bank accounts, debts, attorneys, financial records. I want to know exactly what Scott and Nicole have been doing with my money, and I want to know who has been advising them. Jean's tone did not change, but I could almost hear her pen scratching. Understood. Give me 1 week. I ended the call and looked once more at the bouquet of white roses. Their petals had begun to wilt, curling at the edges, dropping one by one onto the table. Good, I thought, let them wither. Because my children believed they were watching me decay. But they were wrong. I was not withering. I was sharpening. The evaluation took nearly an entire afternoon. A quiet office, a doctor with sharp eyes and a kind smile, endless pages of questions and memory tests. I recited dates, solved puzzles, recalled stories from my childhood. When it was finished, the neuropsychologist set his pen down and said, Mrs. Brown, you are as sharp as any 72-year-old I've ever met, probably sharper than most 50-year-olds. By the next morning, I had a signed report, competent, stable, fully capable of managing my finances, a weapon, neat and official, stamped with authority. Meanwhile, Jean Davies worked with the speed of someone who had seen family betrayals too many times. Within 4 days, she delivered a preliminary report. I spread the pages across my dining table, each line a betrayal written in black ink. Scott and Nicole were drowning in debt. Beyond the expenses I had covered, they had racked up staggering credit card balances. They owed on both luxury cars. They had taken a second mortgage on the house I bought for them. Tuition payments for Emma and Lucas were overdue. And then came the most damning discovery: a hidden account. For 2 years, large sums had been deposited my money, rerouted from the transfers I sent, and immediately withdrawn. A pattern consistent with money laundering, or, at the very least, concealment. Jean included copies of correspondence with a lawyer whose name I did not recognize. The documents outlined steps to establish guardianship over me. The strategy was clear. Present me as erratic, gather witnesses from the club, highlight unusual spending, and file a petition in court. I stared at those pages until the words blurred. All this time, I thought I was teaching them a lesson about respect. Instead, they had been laying a trap to strip me of everything. When Samuel and I built our life together, we never imagined our only child would become my adversary. But as I read Jean's report, I felt something I had not in years' clarity. They had made me the enemy, and enemies are meant to be defeated. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and began to plan. The first step was documentation. I placed the neuropsychologist's report in a folder labeled Competency. Next, Jean's findings, bank accounts, debts, fraud. Finally, copies of every check I had written in the last 7 years, each one a reminder of my generosity. I arranged them neatly, a dossier thicker than any novel I had once assigned my students. The second step was presentation. Scott and Nicole loved appearances, the right clothes, the perfect home, the illusion of wealth. If they wanted a performance, I would give them one. I opened my closet and reached for a black dress I had worn only once, on the day we buried Samuel. Simple, elegant, a garment that carried weight. I held it against my body and saw in the mirror not a grieving widow, but a general preparing for battle. Over the following days, the calls continued. Scott left messages full of syrup and regret. Nicole offered invitations shopping, luncheons, manicures. Emma and Lucas made halting attempts at warmth. I responded politely, never refusing, never revealing my plan. Let them think their charade was working. Let them believe I was softening. On Thursday evening, Scott called with forced cheer. "Mom, how about dinner tomorrow night? All of us, together. We want to apologize properly, talk about moving forward." I smiled into the silence of my apartment. Perfect. "Yes," I said, "that sounds wonderful." When I hung up, I slid the folder of evidence into my purse. My fingers rested on the clasp, steady, sure. For 7 years, I had been the doormat, the checkbook, the fool. Tomorrow night, I would be something else entirely. Tomorrow night, I would be the storm. The house glittered as if for a holiday. Candles flickered on the dining table, the good china was set, and soft music played in the background. Nicole had gone all out. She greeted me with a smile stretched so tight it looked painful. "Theresa, you look wonderful," she gushed, though her eyes flickered nervously to the black dress I had chosen. Scott raised a glass of wine, to family, to forgiveness, and to Mom for being the most generous woman we know. Emma and Lucas chimed in dutifully, their young voices genuine in a way their parents were not. The meal began with forced laughter and rehearsed questions. Scott asked about my hobbies. Nicole complimented my necklace, the same one she once mocked for being old-fashioned. They leaned in as if every word I spoke was precious. It might have fooled anyone else, not me. When dessert plates were cleared, I set my purse on the table. My heart was steady, my hands sure. "I have something to say." Scott and Nicole leaned forward, eyes bright with anticipation, expecting an apology, a promise, perhaps the return of their monthly lifeline. Instead, I drew out a folder and laid it flat on the linen. "These past weeks have been enlightening," I began. "Scott, your sudden concern for my health has been touching. Nicole, your flowers were breathtaking, and the children your letters and calls have meant the world." Nicole's smile trembled. Scott nodded eagerly. "It reminded me how much I've been missing," I continued, "how important it is to be truly involved in each other's lives. Which is why I took some steps of my own." I opened the folder. The neuropsychologist's report sat on top, stamped and signed. First, I had a complete evaluation. As it turns out, I am entirely competent, perfectly capable of managing my finances. Scott's face drained of color. Nicole gripped her wineglass so tightly I thought it might shatter. "Second," I went on, sliding out Jean Davies's report, "I hired a private investigator. She found hidden accounts, crushing debts, and most damning documents prepared with an attorney to declare me unfit." The silence was sharp enough to cut. Emma and Lucas looked from their parents to me, wide-eyed. "Do you know what that is called?" I asked softly. "Fraud, elder abuse, a betrayal of the highest order." Nicole rose from her chair, her voice breaking. "This isn't what it looks like." "It looks," I said, my tone like steel, like two people who decided stealing was easier than working. Two people who thought I was too blind, too broken, to notice. Scott whispered, "Mom, please." "No," I interrupted. "You will listen. For 7 years, I gave you more than $1.5 million. I paid for houses, cars, schools, vacations. In return, I received neglect, manipulation, and finally, a plot to strip me of everything. That ends tonight." I stood, smoothing my dress. "You will vacate this house, the house I purchased, by the end of the month. You will find jobs, pay your own bills, and live within your means. If you contact me again, I will file charges. Brandon assures me we have enough evidence to win." Nicole's face twisted in fury. Scott looked shattered, his head in his hands. Emma and Lucas sat frozen, caught between loyalty and shock. I reached the door, then turned back one last time. "One more thing. I have changed my will. The estate, All $85 million of it will go to charity. Emma and Lucas will receive scholarships, but you, Scott, and you, Nicole, you are cut out entirely. The air left the room like a storm ripping through windows. On the drive home, the night sky stretched wide and calm. For the first time in decades, I felt light, unburdened. The weight of servitude had lifted. I was no longer their bank, their target, their fool. Some lessons are expensive. This one cost my son and his wife everything, but for me the reward was priceless. Freedom. And freedom, I decided as the road unspooled before me, tastes far sweeter than chocolate cake.